When I was 14, my parents left me at an airport because I got a low grade. That's what happens when you don't try your best. He laughed. I never went back. They found me 22 years later, devastated and desperate. Hey, Reddit. I need to set the stage for this narrative because it gets crazy. And you need to know how twisted up these folks were from the start. 22 years ago, I was a 36-year-old man living what looked like the American dream on steroids. My birth parents, Joe and Paige, were more than just prosperous. They were the kings and queens of Detroit. For premium auto stores, BMW and Mercedes, residences that looked like they belonged in magazines, the entire 9 yards. Dad played golf with judges and had governors on fast dial. Our mansion in Buckhead was 7,000 square feet of money on show, with Italian marble, a full-time landscape crew, and a circular driveway full of cars. Think about every rich family cliché you've ever seen in a movie. That was my life as a child. Dad wore a suit to play golf on Saturdays and gave the valet $50 just to make sure everyone saw him. Mom spent more on one centerpiece for a dinner gathering than most families spend on food in a month. But here's the deal with flawless families. Behind those mahogany doors, they usually have some really dark things going on. And our family just plain mind games. Brandon, my older brother, and their golden kid, comes in. They literally made this kid in a lab to be exactly what they desired. 4.0 GPA, captain of the lacrosse team, and early admission to Duke with a full ride. There were trophies all over his bedroom. The kid never got a grade lower than an A. And believe me, they never let me forget it. I was the family letdown that they couldn't quite figure out how to mend. I wasn't a screw-up, so don't get me wrong. 3.8 GPA, varsity tennis, and an advanced math curriculum. Party would be thrown by most parents. Mine noticed a mediocre person wearing a trophy for participation. There was no end to the parallels. Brandon never needed help in geometry. Brandon never came in second place. Brandon never had to take practice tests again. It was like living with a broken record that only played one tune over and over. Why can't you be more like your brother? I started making a mental list of the comparisons. 37 times in 1 week when I was a sophomore. 37 times they found ways to remind me that I wasn't as good as their favorite child. Brandon would simply sit there and not say anything to them to stop. That was the worst part. The kid didn't care what it was doing to me since it was too busy enjoying the accolades. At dinner parties, they would brag about Brandon's latest success with big smiles, then stare at me like I was a stray dog they had taken in by accident. They would claim with tight smiles that deceived no one that Alan was still figuring out what he was good at. In March 2002, everything came to a head. I just concluded the hardest semester of my life at Westminster Academy. Advanced Physics, AP European History, AP Literature, Calculus BC, and Latin 3. Every night we have to do 3 to 4 hours of homework. I was out of breath. It's report card day, and for once I'm proud. 5 A's and 1 A in Advanced Physics. The hardest class in the school. Any sane parent would be proud. My friend thought it was proof that I was getting weak. Dad was in his office. This huge oak-paneled temple to his own ego has pictures of him shaking hands with every politician in Michigan. I knocked, came in, and presented him the report card like it was a crown jewel. He looked at it for what seemed like forever, and his face went darker and darker. He dropped the paper like it was dirty and exclaimed, "This is completely unacceptable. An A-. This is exactly the lazy performance that'll keep you out of top-tier universities." I tried to explain. Advanced Physics was notorious. Only 3 kids got A's. The teacher said I did great, but he cut me off. I don't care what the teacher said. Brandon has never received anything below an A. You're clearly not pushing yourself. Mom appeared like she'd been lurking in the hallway. She probably was. She picked up the report card and did this theatrical headshake. "Alan, we invest $20,000 a year in Westminster. We expect results that justify that investment. This A- says you're not taking your responsibilities seriously. 20 grand a year and they were losing their minds over 1 A-. Let that sink in. I studied 6 hours a night for the physics final. I told them I had tutoring twice a week. I did every extra credit assignment. Apparently that wasn't sufficient. Dad said, Maybe you need a reality check about what happens to people who settle for good enough. They did that thing that married people do when they talk to each other without saying a word. There was a decision being made, and I wasn't a part of it. Dad said, "We're going on a spontaneous family trip to Milwaukee tomorrow. I have important business meetings with a target company so you can learn about how actual business works. What about school?" Mom responded with a wicked little sneer that missing 2 days won't damage your scores. Also, this will be a great way to learn. Brandon couldn't come because he had lacrosse playoffs. That should have been my first warning sign. When the golden boy was available, they never took me on business trips. That night, I packed clothes for 3 days and really thought this might be how they made peace. Maybe they wanted to spend time together with just the 3 of us. I should have seen that they packed less than usual for a 3-day excursion. I should have asked why they were still whispering after they believed I had gone to bed. I went to bed instead, hoping that Milwaukee might be a new beginning. I was such a fool. The flight from Detroit to Milwaukee Mitchell took off at 9:15 a.m. Wednesday a.m. They kept making these vague comments about character growth and learning how to be independent on the plane. They avoided giving me clear answers when I questioned about Dad's meetings or our plans. Dad was reading a business magazine and laughing at some of the stories like he was in on a private joke. Mom kept looking at her watch and giving him those knowing looks. Looking back, they undoubtedly timed everything down to the minute. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was a deliberate killing. Mom said, "You'll understand soon enough," and patted my hand. There are moments when you can't express the most important lessons. You have to go through them. We got there at 11:30 in the morning. Instead of going to baggage claim or getting a rental car, Dad took us right to the departure airport. I thought he needed to get return tickets or something. Mom told Alan to wait by this pillar, which was a concrete column near security. A lot of people are there, but not too many. The perfect place for me to be where I wouldn't be in anyone's way and wouldn't get lost. Dad left something in the rental car. And I have to call regarding the dinner meeting tonight. 30 minutes, then lunch and the motel. I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong, but something was. "Alan, can I come with you?" "You're 14, Dad remarked with a mocking laugh. "You won't die if you're alone for 30 minutes. Think of it as practice for being an adult." "But what if it's only 30 minutes? Mom said it again forcefully. "Stay right here. Don't stray. Stay away from people you don't know. Stay here. We'll be back before you know it." I saw them walk toward the ground conveyance. Dad had his hand on Mom's back like they were on a mission. They left. I didn't notice it then, but I remember it perfectly now. They didn't have any bags. Not the leather briefcase that Dad always took with him. Not Mom's big purse that normally held half of her life. Nothing. They were just marching toward the exit with nothing in their hands, as if they were going directly to departures. The first half hour went by very slowly. I sat on my duffel bag and watched families get back together. Business travelers hurry to their gates. Old couples making their way through the masses. I was starting to worry after 45 minutes. Dad's meetings were due to start at 2 o'clock. They should be back by now if we were going to get lunch first. I was officially freaking out by 1:30. I looked at the information desk. No pages. I looked in every store and restaurant within 100 yards of that pillar. Nothing at all. I saw him at about 2 p.m. Dad was walking quickly past the security area, some 50 feet away, toward the departure gates. It seemed like he was late for a flight. By myself, I waved my arms and cried his name, going toward him even though Mom told me to stay put. He could see me clearly. We looked at each other across that busy terminal. He stopped, looked me in the eye for a few seconds, and grinned. Not a smile from a loving parent. Something cool and happy. "Get it, son?" He yelled over the noise so loudly that other people on the bus stopped and stared. It's time to see what the world is really like when you don't do your best. Then he turned around and vanished among the crowd on its way to the gates. I stood there like I had been hit by a truck, watching hundreds of people go by me while my mind raced to figure out what had just happened. My dad had just left me alone in an unfamiliar city 800 meters from home. When I got back to the pillar and checked my wallet, the whole truth hit me. $47. No cell phone, This happened in 2002. Parents didn't think their kids required phones at 14. I just have my Westminster student card as ID. There are no credit cards, no emergency contacts, and no way to get home. 800 miles from Detroit with less than $50 and no strategy. They left me at Milwaukee Mitchell as punishment for getting an A in advanced physics. I need to say that again since it sounds crazy even to write it. My parents took me to another state and left me at an airport because I received an A-. I spent another hour beside that pillar, going from not believing what was happening to being completely scared. I kept thinking they would come back and laugh about the world's meanest practical joke. The logical part understood they were probably already on their way back to Detroit. Around 4:00 p.m., security at the airport came over. Detective Monica, who is about 45 and has that seen-it-all-twice cop vibe. Professional yet not too formal. She crouched down to my level and said, "Son, you've been sitting here for a long time. Is everything okay? Someone is waiting for you." The whole narrative came out like a dam that had broken. As I talked, I saw Detective Monica's face change from worried to barely controlled wrath. "How long have you been here by yourself?" "For hours." "Is there a way to get in touch with your parents? Numbers to call? Details about the hotel?" "No, ma'am. I don't have a phone. Therefore, they didn't tell me where we were staying." She wrote down everything. Full names, residence in Detroit, Dad's office numbers, and dealership information. She said in a serious tone, "What your parents did wasn't discipline. It's a crime to leave a child alone, and it's a serious crime in Wisconsin. I'm calling the Milwaukee Police Department and Child Services. You're not in trouble, but we need to get you the right care while we figure this out." 2 Milwaukee cops showed up within 20 minutes. Detective Paul was probably in his 50s, had gray hair, and looked like he had seen the worst of humanity. Officer Emma, his partner, was younger and seemed rather agitated when she heard what I had to say. Detective Paul pulled out a recording recorder and said, "Your parents committed aggravated child abandonment under Wisconsin law. Need to get your full statement. Take your time. Tell me everything." I walked them through the whole sequence. The A-, their reaction, the sudden Milwaukee trip, waiting by the pillar, Dad's final words before vanishing. Detective Paul asked clarifying questions and had me repeat details for accuracy. He claimed that leaving a child behind is a Class 2 criminal here. 3 to 7 years in jail. Your parents' actions are not only nasty, but they are also against the law, and we take these matters very seriously. Detective Paul had seen this before, but not quite like this. He said that most of the time, it's because of poverty while we waited for DCFS. Parents can't pay for food or a place to live. The child is alone. This is not the same. Your parents left you as punishment. That makes it much more legally messed up. The Wisconsin Department of Children and Family Services came at about 6 p.m. Carol was in her mid-50s, had gray hair, and had a calm, professional vibe that made it seem like she had done this 1,000 times. She had a briefcase and talked to me like an adult. "I'm sorry this happened, Alan," she murmured as she sat next to me in the airport waiting room. "While the legal system takes care of their actions, we'll make sure you're safe." DCFS had been calling my parents all afternoon. Home phone, business lines, and long messages. They worked with the Detroit Police Department to check on our welfare at our Buckhead address. Did they answer? She replied no, which tells us a lot about what they care about. Around 5 p.m., Detroit police found them at home. Time in Detroit. The officers said that Joe and Paige seemed shocked that the police were involved. They said they were training their son to be self-sufficient and that they would let him work through the problem on his own for a few days before coming back. A few days in a city I'd never been to before. The officers in Detroit wrote down what they said. Carol claimed that those will be used as proof in the criminal prosecution. The Carver family took me in that night in Kenosha, which is 20 miles north of Milwaukee. Tom was the head of a high school. Susan is a nurse at the local hospital. They had been performing emergency foster care for more than 10 years and had 2 teenagers, Katie, a 16-year-old girl, and Elias, a 15-year-old boy. Carol said this was only for a short time throughout the travel. A few days as we figure out what to do next. The Carvers have a lot of experience with emergency placements. The Carver house was much like any other house. A two-story colonial house in a middle-class neighborhood with a tiny yard and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Katie and Elias were courteous but interested. It was clear that they were wondering what kind of situation would drive a stranger from Detroit into their home with no warning. Susan led me to the guest room and remarked, "We're glad you're safe. We'll sign you up for school tomorrow and make sure you have everything you need, such clothes and school supplies. Just try to relax tonight." Of course, I didn't sleep at all. Kept hearing what Dad said. "Figure it out, son." Trying to figure out how parents can leave their child in a different city because of one bad grade. The next morning, the police brought criminal accusations. Child endangerment, aggravated child abandonment, and irresponsible behavior are all felonies. I still recall the case number quite well. Within 48 hours, my birth parents engaged the most expensive white-collar criminal defense firm in Detroit. It was evident what they were going to do. Keep the media's attention to a minimum, make the occurrence sound like a misunderstood parenting choice, and work out a deal to lower the charges so that their reputation isn't ruined. They cared more about keeping their social status than getting their lost child back safely. At the same time, I was learning what real parental caring was like. The Carvers were nice to me, but they also allowed me time to think about what had happened. Tom helped me sign up for Kenosha Township High School for a short while so that I wouldn't fall behind in school. Susan brought me shopping for clothes and acted like it was just a typical family thing instead than a charity. Katie and Elias let me be a part of their daily lives without making it awkward. Movie nights helped me get used to the new social dynamics at school, making me feel less like a lost piece of luggage and more like a temporary family. The difference was really clear. Tom would ask me how my day was and then really listen to what I said. Susan made sure I had money for lunch and didn't act like it was a huge favor she was doing me. Tom replied, "Nice work," and then went on with his life after I scored a B+ on a history test at Kenosha Township. No questions about why it wasn't an A. No comparing yourself to other students. But the Carvers couldn't do long-term placement since they didn't have enough room and had other fostering obligations. So DCFS began searching for a long-term solution. That's when I first met Eric and Celeste. Eric is 42 and teaches electrical engineering at Northwestern. Celeste is a 40-year-old professional psychologist who works with families who have been through trauma and teenagers who are growing up. They have been married for 15 years and have been foster parents for more than 10 years. They do not have any biological children. Celeste remarked on our first contact that she'd like to meet and see if this could work. You don't have to make a decision right away, and you should feel free to ask any questions. Their house was bigger than the Carvers, but it still seemed like a home, not a store. The furniture in the living area was set up for talking, not showing off. There are books all over. 3 workstations and tools that were better than those in Westminster's shop class were set up in the basement, which was turned into a combination office and electrical workshop. "Do you want to work with electricity?" Eric asked me what I was doing as I looked over the arrangement. I said, "A little," which was a huge understatement. Since middle school, I've been educating myself the basics of wiring, electronics, and electrical systems, largely because I was curious and bored. "What kinds of things have you worked on?" I talked about a lighting system I put up for our church youth group and a basic control panel I made to help my tennis coach keep track of the lights on the court. Eric really listened, asked technical questions, and made suggestions about how to make things better. "Want to see some of the things I'm working on?" For the next hour, he showed me how to use research to look at power distribution and the electrical grid. He didn't treat me like a kid. He treated me like a coworker. It was refreshing and very encouraging. He pulled up schematics on his computer and stated, "Most people think electrical work is just connecting wires, but it's really about knowing how power flows, how to control loads, and how to make things work better. It is physics that can be used right away in the actual world." He showed me a project he was working on as a consultant. He was revamping the electrical systems for a factory to save their energy costs by 30%. Save them $120,000 a year and make them more reliable. That's the kind of labor that really counts. Celeste's method was also courteous, but it was more about emotional growth. She told me during our second meeting that you had been through a lot of trauma. When a parent leaves, it leaves severe psychological scars that take a long time to heal. I want you to know that all of your feelings, whether they're anger, perplexity, grief, or even relief, are perfectly natural and valid. She didn't force me to talk, but she did make it plain that I could get professional help whenever I was ready. Eric and Celeste asked me if I wanted to try longer-term placement after 3 weeks of regular visits and talks. Eric said, "We'd love for you to join our family. No stress. You can always change your mind, but we think you might be happy here, and we'd love to be a part of your life." I moved in with Eric and Celeste in May 2002, 3 months after the Milwaukee Mitchell desertion. The criminal prosecution against my birth parents moved slowly through Milwaukee County Court. Their lawyers kept asking for more time and pushing for plea deals. The prosecutor was trying to prove that this was part of a pattern of psychological abuse, not just a one-time mistake by the parent. I was given a guardian to look out for my legal rights. Richard, a 60-year-old former prosecutor who worked on child welfare issues. He asked me a lot of questions and wrote a long report that included not only the desertion but also the bigger picture of perfectionism and emotional abuse in my birth family. He informed me after one appointment, "Your parents don't really feel bad. They're only worried about avoiding legal trouble and protecting their reputation. They haven't asked about your health, living situation, or emotional recovery." My brother Brandon visited once during this time, about 6 months after the abandonment. He drove up from Detroit in his BMW convertible, which our parents gave him as a graduation gift, and took me to lunch in downtown Milwaukee. He looked uncomfortable the whole time, like he had drawn the short straw and had to deal with the damage control. He kept checking his phone. "Mom and Dad miss you," he said, picking at his Caesar salad. "Do they really? They're worried about the court case." Dad adds that lawyers are costing him $15,000 a month and that advertising is bad for business at the dealership. Some friends stopped asking them to hang out. I could tell that he was more worried about their money problems than about my health. Do they feel bad about what they did to me? For a long time, Brandon thought about this. He finally acknowledged they were sorry it turned into a legal battle. That talk gave me all the information I needed. In November 2002, the case ended with a plea deal. No jail term, but big penalties, 2 years of supervised probation, required parenting education, and only supervised visits. They still had legal parental rights, but I stayed with Eric and Celeste in long-term foster care. 8 months later, Eric and Celeste asked me if I wanted to adopt them and make them my own. Celeste remarked, "We've come to love you like our own son. We would be happy to adopt you and make you a permanent part of our family." "Yes," I said right away. "Of course. Yes." The adoption process took almost a year because of legal issues, but it was finished in August 2003. I changed my last name as part of the adoption. A new identity, a new family, and a new life with people who cared about me as a person, not simply how well I did. My academic history before high school with Eric and Celeste was very different. They didn't put constant pressure on them to be perfect. Instead, they encouraged them to explore and be curious. They didn't compare my accomplishments to Brandon's. Instead, they praised my own interests and skills. Eric became my unofficial teacher in applied sciences and electrical engineering. He didn't push me to work with electricity, but when I showed real desire, he gave me resources, advice, and chances that other high schools don't. By my sophomore year, I was taking undergraduate electrical engineering classes at Northwestern and doing research projects with graduate students. Celeste helped me get better at reading people and understanding my own feelings. She taught me how to have good relationships, talk to others in a way that works, and deal with hard feelings without hiding them or letting them out in a big way. By the time I graduated high school, I had straight A's, high test scores, and a portfolio of electrical projects that wowed college admissions officers. Most significantly, I made real friends, found interests outside of schoolwork, and understood what it felt like to be valued for who I was instead of what I did. Stanford let me in to study electrical engineering and gave me a half-merit scholarship. As I got ready for college, my birth parents tried to get in touch with me. In July 2006, Eric and Celeste got a letter from their lawyer's office with costly letterhead. "Dear Alan, we are proud of how well you did in school and that you got into Stanford. We know you're upset about past family problems, but we hope you can see that our rigorous standards helped you get to where you are now. We want to get back in touch and be a part of your future successes. Please get in touch with us to talk about how we can help you pay for college and repair our connection. I showed the letter to Celeste with love and respect, Joe and Paige, and then I put it away without answering. Stanford was hard, but it was the precise kind of place I had been looking for. I did well in difficult math and electrical engineering classes, made friends with other serious students, and started dating Allison, a math major from Maine who was also interested in power systems and problem solving. During my junior year, I worked as an intern at an electrical contracting company in Tampa, where I helped small businesses build power systems. 2 Stanford graduates started the company to build improved electrical distribution systems for stores. They wanted to hire me full-time once I graduated, but I had larger intentions. In my senior year, I worked with 2 other students to start our own electrical contracting business. Let's call it Flex Chain. It helps small manufacturing businesses make their electrical systems work better and waste less energy by managing their power better. The business model was easy to understand and worked well. Most small factories were using electrical systems that were designed in the 1980s and 1990s, which cost them a lot of money because they were inefficient and used old equipment. We undertake full electrical audits, find places where energy is wasted, and restructure their systems to work as well as possible. Our usual customers save 20% to 30% on their electricity bills and made their systems more reliable. My partners were in charge of sales and managing projects. I worked on the technical design work, which was the actual engineering that made the reductions possible. Flex Chain quickly became popular with medium-sized producers in Maine and Florida. Within 8 months, we had more than 200 active clients and were making enough money to pay for our basic costs of doing business. More crucially, bigger electrical contracting companies were interested in buying our clients. In September 2010, we sold Flex Chain to an electrical contracting company on the Fortune 500 list for $1.8 million. I paid $600,000 for my portion of the purchase. At 22, I had a strong financial base to work from. The purchase of the Flex Chain opened up several opportunities in the electrical contracting business. I started out as a senior electrical project manager at the company that bought me, and then I moved up to a supervisory post with a bigger industrial electrical company in Cleveland. Allison and I stayed together while we were in grad school. She got her PhD in applied mathematics from Miami, while I worked as an electrical contractor to build my profession. In 2012, we moved to Cleveland together, and she got a job as a senior data scientist at Dell Technologies. I was the shop foreman at an electrical contracting company that built complex industrial electrical systems by the time I was 30. By the time I was 33, I owned my own electrical contracting business with more than 30 people and was being sought after by big industrial companies for collaborations. The Cleveland market was just right for what I was making. My company worked on big industrial electrical projects that needed a lot of engineering knowledge and couldn't be done by a regular residential electrician. We weren't just putting in outlets and stringing wires. We were constructing full power distribution systems for companies, making sure that manufacturing equipment had the right amount of electricity, and setting up backup power systems that could keep whole production lines operating even when the power went out. Work with high margins that needed actual skill. My firm was making a good 6 figures a year. My investments in different electrical contracting businesses were worth more than $1 million. And I had a good name in Cleveland's electrical contracting business. Allison and I bought a house in Westlake Hills and traveled a lot. We lived well, but not in a flashy way. During this whole time, my birth parents tried to get in touch with me. Friend requests on Facebook that I blocked right away. Messages on LinkedIn that were removed without being read. I threw away unread holiday cards that were sent to my job. Letters sent to our son Alan were sent back to the sender. Everything is blocked. Everyone ignored. All of this is written down in a file I kept just for this reason. On the advice of Celeste and my lawyer. Eric and Celeste were still my genuine family through it all. They went to Cleveland for my wedding in 2014, celebrated every business milestone with me, and loved Allison like their own daughter. I took time off work in 2016 to aid Eric with his treatment and recuperation after he was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. Do you ever think about how your life would have been different if you had stayed in touch with your birth parents? Celeste said during one of their travels to Cleveland. Never, I responded honestly. They choose what to do. The best things in my life happened because I could connect with individuals who really care about me. We didn't talk much on social media. He had married his college girlfriend, taken over the day-to-day operations of 2 dealerships, and had 3 kids. From what he posted on Facebook, it looked like he was living the life our parents had planned for him. Membership in a country club, fancy cars, extravagant family trips, and being well known in Detroit's commercial scene. During a rare phone chat, he said, "Dad asks about you sometimes." I'm sure he does. They don't ask for as much as they used to. Having grandchildren affected how they saw family ties. They know they messed up with us when we were kids. That's great for them. It doesn't change anything for me. Alan, they're in their 60s now. Mom has been sick. Brandon, don't you think it's time to let go of old grudges? When I was 14, they left me at an airport. That's not a grudge. It's a reasonable reaction to folks who show they can't be trusted with fundamental human decency. After that talk, he stopped attempting to get us back together. My life was steady, I was doing well at work, and I was entirely cut off from the folks who had left me. Allison and I were both thrilled. I had a good relationship with Eric and Celeste, and my business kept increasing. In March 2024, though, everything changed. A woman named Lisa who worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Detroit sent me a message on LinkedIn. "Mr. Allen, I'm here to talk to you about an urgent family situation involving Joe and Paige. Please call our office right away about a legal case that needs to be handled quickly. You need to deal with these legal matters right away because they are time sensitive." I didn't answer and erased it. Then I blacklisted the sender. Then I got emails at work and voicemails on my office phone from different lawyers. Finally, I got a certified letter at home that I signed for out of curiosity. There was a letter from Brandon and a pile of legal papers that told a story that was becoming more and more familiar. "Alan, I know you don't want to talk to them, but Mom and Dad are in big trouble with the law for tax evasion, fraud, and money laundering. The dealerships are all going through bankruptcy, and they might get 15 to 20 years in federal jail. I have been attempting to deal with this on my own, but I can't afford the legal bills and don't have the money to aid them. They need people to testify to their character and help them with their legal defense. I know you're doing well, and I hope you'll be able to help. Please call me even though we had a lot of problems when we were kids. Brandon, I looked into the case using public records and press stories. The automobile group was really about to go broke. The IRS had put tax liens on more than $2.1 million. The FBI had searched all 4 dealerships and their owners' homes with search warrants. Customers, former workers, and business partners all filed criminal complaints, saying that the company had been committing fraud for at least 10 years. The Detroit Free Press says that federal investigators thought Joe was running a complicated scheme to avoid paying taxes and launder money. He was systematically underreporting cash sales, stealing money from service departments, and moving money through fake companies in Vermont and Utah to avoid paying federal taxes. The IRS criminal investigation began looking into the matter after a former financial manager named Daniel noticed strange behavior. Daniel had been with them for 6 years at their main Buckhead dealership before being fired for asking too many questions regarding accounting problems. Joe and Paige might have gotten 15 to 20 years in federal jail, and they would have lost all their money because of civil penalties and restitution obligations. My phone kept ringing. Brandon, distant family members I hadn't talked to since I was a kid. Family friends are attempting to make me feel bad about not helping. In one voicemail, my paternal grandma begged me to remember that they are still your parents, no matter what happened in the past. In times of trouble, family looks out for each other. You have the tools to help them, and they really need it. Things became worse when they came to my Cleveland business. Joe and Paige, who are now in their mid-60s, were waiting in the lobby of my electrical contracting firm. They seemed older and more desperate than I remembered. Joe's hair was all gray, and Paige wore a cheap frock. It was evident that they had come to Cleveland just to confront me in person. My boss at work called my cell phone. "There are 2 people here who say they are your real parents. They want to meet right away. Should I send them to your office?" I answered quietly, "No, Get them exit the property right away with an escort. Put their names on the permanent list of people who can't visit, and let me know if they come back. I could see my security walking them to their rental car in the parking lot from my office on the second floor. It looked like Paige was crying. Joe looked like he had lost everything. Brandon contacted my personal cell that night. They drove all the way to Cleveland to visit you. Alan, they're in a lot of trouble. The federal sentence hearing is set for next month. They're surely going to prison for decades if they don't have character witnesses or help with their legal bills. Then they should have thought about that before breaking federal laws. You have to admit that they are family. No, I said in a calm voice. My family is Eric and Celeste. Allison is part of my family. Don't expect me to help folks who left me at an airport when I was 14. Please, brother. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. 4 months, the federal case against my birth parents was the biggest story in Detroit business news. Famous car sellers are going to jail for a long time. Federal probe brings down the family empire. They lost all of their social status. Their business's reputation is in shambles. I could have just watched from Cleveland as karma finally caught up with them after 20 years. But I remembered what Eric had taught me about how electrical systems work. Elegant solutions deal with the fundamental causes of problems, not merely the symptoms on the surface. The main reason was that Joe and Paige had spent their whole lives avoiding real consequences for their deeds. The abuse, the abandonment, and the corporate deception were all part of a pattern of thinking that rules didn't apply to them. I made the choice to help them learn that lesson the right way. I hired a forensic accounting firm in Detroit to look into the family's financial practices in great detail. Not to help them avoid prosecution, but to make sure that federal investigators could see all the material that was important. The forensic accountants I hired were serious about their work. These people worked for the federal government and were experts at investigating white-collar crimes. They knew exactly what to look for and how to write everything down correctly for court. I spent $25,000 on it, but it was worth it to make sure the job was done well. My investigators found out that Joe had also been stealing money from the Detroit Children's Foundation, where Paige was the vice chair of the board. They were stealing money from a charity that helps sick kids while also making themselves look like good community leaders who care about others. The theft from the Detroit Children's Foundation was very bad. Joe had been using one of his shell firms to bill the charity for consulting services, even though he never did any work for them. He had taken almost $90,000 from a group that gave medical equipment to children's hospitals over the course of 3 years. Federal prosecutors got the evidence and used it to broaden their probe. I also found out that Brandon was probably involved in a lot of the dealership fraud. For at least 3 years, he had been signing off on fake sales documents and taking money from cash registers. Daniel, the whistleblower who told the federal government about them, got in touch with me through my legal team. He gave prosecutors further evidence that they hadn't found before. Recorded discussions with Joe, pictures of fake documents, and extensive records of money laundering through offshore bank accounts. Daniel had been writing down everything for months before he was let go. He was smart enough to see that something was very wrong and diligent enough to make a case that couldn't be broken. He obtained recordings showing Joe telling staff to lie about how much cash they made. There are pictures of 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and one that shows actual revenue. There are also bank statements that show money was being sent to shell businesses in Utah and Vermont. Daniel told me on a conference call with my lawyers that I knew they would try to blame everything on lower-level workers once the investigation started. So, I took sure to write down how Joe was involved in every part of the deception. They couldn't